You want to learn how to create force fields just like the 14th Doctor? Well, I'm going to show you how with this After Effects tutorial.
Alright, so here we are in After Effects, and this is the footage we're going to be working with today. So I've basically just recorded me playing with the Sonic. I just do make like a square, then I do a thing in the middle, and then obviously I'm going to do a little thing with my hands. We don't really have to animate the hands thing, but it is kind of just there as like test footage basically. So to get into making the actual effect, we're going to need two plugins for this. They're both free from videocopilot.net. I will link them in the description of this video so you can download them just directly from there. And these two plugins, especially the main one, is Saber and VC Color Vibrance. Saber is basically the main one because it's going to be making what is essentially our edges of our little effects that we're creating, and which will all make sense in just a moment when we actually get into it. So to start creating the effect, we are going to need to make a new composition. Obviously, we've got the image open in what's technically our main composition. So go to composition here, new composition. Now, yours might just be set to like 1920 by 1080 as per regular. What you're going to need to do is make sure lock aspect ratio to 16:9 is checked and just bring it up a little bit. I wouldn't make it too high because it doesn't need to be 4K, because 4K would be very hard to work with and might just make your PC lag. But bring it up just to round about here. It doesn't have to be like super specific. It's just there to help us in case the edges of obviously Saber get out of control. We're going to rename this composition screen. Just make sure all this is fine. Make sure it's set to black, and that's fine. Click OK. So now we're in our new composition. In our new composition, we're going to need to make a total of 4 layers. There's going to be 3 for the middle of the screen and 1 for the Saber. So we can start by making our Saber layer by going here and pressing Ctrl Y to create a new layer. Make sure it's make comp size, and then click. Actually, before we click OK, we're going to rename this Saber and click OK. So obviously on this layer, we're going to add the Saber effect. And this thing I'm using here is called FX Console. It is another free plugin that you can download for After Effects. I will link it in the description, obviously, if you want to download it. Alternatively, if you are looking for your effects, you can go to Effects and Presets and search them from here. So on this layer, we're just going to add the Saber effect. Now, we need a mask for this. So to create that mask, we're going to go up to here, to the rectangle tool. To access that tool, you can press Q on your keyboard. And we're just going to create a rectangle on our screen. And that's it. Now we're going to go to Customize Core under Saber and set this core type from Saber to Layer Masks. And it will now be on our little rectangle that we created on the screen. So now we're going to need to adjust Saber a little bit to make it just look a little bit nicer. We're going to change the glow intensity to 8%. We're going to change the glow spread to 0.05. We're going to change the glow bias to 0.35. And then we're going to change the core size to 1.70. I know, it just kind of look a lot thinner than it was. So by this technicality, you wouldn't need to make your composition too big, but it does help. Just when we're rescaling things a little bit later on as well. That's all fine. Saber is on its own layer. Now we just need to go into here, create a new layer by pressing Ctrl Y, so just a new solid, and click OK. Drag this solid under your Saber layer, and now with your Saber layer, go onto here, press M on your keyboard to bring your masks. Click this mask, press Ctrl C to copy, or you can go to Edit, Copy. Go onto this layer, Ctrl V to paste, or alternatively Edit, Paste. And now this mask will be on this layer. So this is just going to keep everything sort of in the middle of where Saber is. Now for this next layer that we've just created, it's going to get very interesting because we need to add quite a few effects on there. So first we're going to add the fractal noise effect. So fractal noise, and that can just basically be left as it is. Doesn't need any changing whatsoever. Next we're going to add on the fill effect. With the fill effect, we're going to change the colour from this red colour here to sort of a light faded blue. And obviously because we can't see this layer, and the reason we can't see this layer is because there is a Saber layer quite literally on the top of it. Just go onto your Saber layer, drop down the Saber effect, go to render settings, and where it says composite settings, change that from black to transparent. And now you can see everything that's happening under your saber layer. So now we'll go back to black solid 1 that we've created our fractal noise and fill on. Next, we're going to add the VC color vibrance effect onto this layer. The VC color vibrance, and then we're going to change this color to sort of maybe a darker blue, kind of like this. And then it just kind of does this to the layer, so you can see that by turning it on and off, it just adds a little bit more blue in there on top of our fill effect. Next, we're going to add onto this layer the circle effect. So circles on there, and now this is sort of where it gets very interesting. On the circle effect, we're going to drop down the feather, and we're going to change the feather outer edge to 24. And then we're going to check invert circle. So that looks quite funky, doesn't it? Now with this, we're going to change the blending mode of the circle under here to stencil alpha. So now this will only do that to the layer. And we'll just basically take out a circle, and you can see that that animates all the way to the edges of our mask, which is what we're going for to animate that little thing that happens when we put the Sonic in front of our screen. And obviously we can move this circle around as well, which we are going to be doing to sort of line up with where our Sonic will be. But we can figure that all out in a little moment. Next, what we're going to do, since we've got all of our effects that we need here, we're going to take black solid 1 here and duplicate it by pressing Ctrl D with that layer selected. And we can just rename this second layer by clicking enter on our keyboard and just changing it to black solid 2. That will just make our life a little bit less confusing. Now with this layer, we only need to change quite literally one simple thing. Go to your circle, make sure your second layer is selected, black solid 2. And where it says invert circle, just uncheck that. So now you've got layer 1 where the circle is inverted, layer 2 where it's not inverted, and you can see that obviously that fills back in that circle. But that looks a little funky, so what we're going to need to do is create something for the middle of our circle. This is where it gets very interesting. So go back to black solid 2 and Ctrl D to duplicate that layer. So now we have 3 black solids. Now on this layer, we're just going to close up all my effects, and we're going to delete and add quite a few effects. So first, you can just delete the fill effect because we don't need that. And now on here, you can add the X tile effect. With hex tile, drag this below fractal noise and above VC color vibrance. And now we're going to change a few things on the hex tile effect. Just essentially the radius, because it makes our hex tiles bigger and smaller. So we're going to change the radius from 50 to 9. You can play about with the radius to sort of your liking and what you want for this effect, but I'm going to go with 9 for now. Next on this layer, we need to do a very interesting thing. So we need to add on another circle effect. So just add a second circle on that layer, and then we're going to sort of animate this circle with the other circle to be sort of opposite of each other. So for our first circle here, the one that's above the one we've just added, so first circle, make sure you go down onto that one. And we're going to change the feather here. From feather outer edge, we're going to change that to 30. And then our second circle, we're going to go to feather, feather outer edge, and change that to 49. And we're going to check invert circle on this second circle here. And then we're going to change the blending mode from none to stencil alpha. So now what this is going to do is sort of create this little effect where you can see the hex tiles in the middle, and it fills in that little black space that we previously had. And next on this layer, we're going to add the turbulent displace effect. And then we're going to change this effect so the size instead of 100 is 14. And that's all we need to do for that effect. Now it's all on to the fun bit, the animating. So what we need to do, because we've now got 2 circles on the layer, is we need to animate them so that the radius of these 2 circles sort of work in tandem with each other, but are not the exact same. That sounds a little confusing, but basically what we're going to be having happen is, because both the radiuses are currently set to 75, we want this radius to be entirely different to the second radius. So for now, we're going to set the radius of circle 2 to 0, and we're going to set the radius of circle 1 to 41. And you can see this will animate pretty much outwards. And to make these obviously work together, we're going to need to use an expression to simply link them up. So we're going to drop down black solid 3 here, drop down effects, drop down circle, and drop down circle 2. I'm just going to drag this up so you can see what I'm doing. We can do it any which way that we kind of want to, but I'm going to do it the most basic way because circle 2 is set to 0. I'm going to link the top circle to circle 2. So on the radius for circle, hold Alt on the keyboard and click the stopwatch. And now we're just going to drag this little pick whip here up to the radius on circle 2. And to this expression, we're just going to add plus 41. And that will just keep this always at 41 while this is at 0. So this will always be 41 above whatever this is. And as you can now see, when we animate circle 2's radius to come up, we're always going to have that happening on both of them. And we're just going to have a constant radius. But now we need to sort of also solve this little circle that's happening, because this circle needs to be animating with the circle that we've just created. So we obviously know that this circle was created by putting these two layers together. So to do that, we essentially need to go to the circle on black solid 2, and obviously we're going to animate this as well. But essentially that should just be the exact same thing. So what we're now going to do is we're going to link up this circle on black solid 2 to the circle that is on black solid 3. So to do this, we're just going to bring up the bottom bit here, drop down black solid 2, drop down effects, drop down the circle. And then we're also going to drop down black solid 3 and just close up our top circle. We just want circle 2, what has a radius of 0 currently. And we're just going to hold Alt, click the stopwatch on black solid 2 circle, and then link that pick whip up to the circle 2 that is on black solid 3. So now it will always be at 0. And we're going to do the same for black solid 1. Drop that down, drop down effects, drop down the circle. Alt click the radius and drag that up to circle 2, which is on black solid 3. And now this is what we get. So close up black solid 1, close up black solid 3. Drag this back down, click black solid 3. And you can see when I animate the radius, it's now doing this kind of thing. Obviously, it does get a little bit laggy when you are doing that because it's animating quite a few properties, multiple circles at once. But now it's doing exactly what we wanted it to do. Currently, though, we have sort of no effects going on. This just looks like a plain blue background. It's not very exciting, I know. So what we're going to do, we're going to go back to black solid 2, and we're going to set our fill effect on black solid 2 to 89%. We're going to go back to black solid 1, set the fill effect to 89%. Now that will change the blue hue here as well. And then another thing we need to do on this fill effect is just make sure that all masks is checked. Do the same on black solid 2, all masks checked. By doing that, it allows us to see our fractal noise coming through that design. Now, next thing we're going to need to do is just go down to our 3 layers here. Click the top one, hold down Shift, select the bottom one, and then just press T on your keyboard so you can see the opacity. And we're going to set the opacity of all of these layers to 42%. And now, just so you can see blend modes, if you can't see them, make sure you press toggle switches and modes. We need to set the blend mode of all 3 solids to screen. Just make sure you set all of them. And that will then allow these 3 to interact with each other. And now with this, it's time to get to the animating part. So first, I'm just going to make sure my saber layer is set to blend mode screen so that it will interact much better with whatever is below it. And obviously, as you can see, our circle is still sort of in the middle. So to sort of fix that, we can go to black solid 3, circle 2, change the opacity to 0, and then you won't see that circle. Obviously, if you change the opacity to 100, you will see the circle. That'll just be part of something you can animate with this. But let's just go on to the main premise of this. Let's not worry about that little bit in the middle for now. Let's go back into our main composition. Go to project, and we're going to drag in our screen comp over the top here. And now we can see that. If you can't see the modes, just go toggle switches and modes, set the blend mode to screen, and it will now look much better on top of that. Obviously, because I'm using technically a 3D layer, we're going to need to do some 3D work. The easiest way you can do this sort of 3D work is to just go onto this screen layer here and add on basic 3D. And then with this basic 3D, you can change the swivel or the tilt. And you can change that until it sort of aligns with whatever you want on your image. You can even change the distance to image, which will technically change its size. If you are creating this effect, I wouldn't recommend doing it in the way that I have and sort of having it be at the side, because it's not really going to show much. And now we're just going to figure out where we want this to be and then sort of align it with our image. So I'm just going to figure out where the first point of contact would be, and then the second point. So the second point is all the way over there, which means I need to change my swivel just a little bit and my positioning. For certain layers, you might be able to just do a 3D track on them, but if you're doing it sort of like this, there's no way to 3D track, so this is kind of the manual way to go about trying to get it to line up with itself. And that should now look fine. Obviously, it's not perfect because it's sort of on a side, so let's see if we can just change the scale a little bit. Maybe get a little bit more, change the position maybe, and the scale, and see if that lines up just a lot better now. Now, honestly, it was fine as it was before. It's just trying to sort of finesse the way that it looks. Like I say, I sort of recommend doing it more face on than doing it on a side like I am. Sometimes if you are doing it on a side, a better way you can go about it is by doing a 3D track, which is essentially sending this into a 3D layer that you can then put in that scene. Alternatively, you can just use basic 3D and just sort of rough map it. But as for the screen itself, we are going to need to do some animation. So I'm going to show you sort of the animation that you would do on this thing. So we're going to go into the saber layer, and essentially what we're going to be doing is animating the start and end offsets on these. So while we do that, I'm just going to turn off my 3 layers that are below my saber layer so we can just see this. So you can see when we move the start offset, it now does this. And the end offset would obviously do the exact opposite. So what we'd want to do is we'd want to animate the end offset to move with whatever animation I'm doing. So we can start at this point here by going into our main comp, go back into screen, click the stopwatch for the end offset while it's at 0%. Go to the next point of animation that I do here, go back into screen, and then we'll change the end offset so that it's just doing pretty much the same motion that I would have been doing myself. So that's a 31.5, so it sort of goes to the end here. Go back in there. So next point of contact would be down here. Go back into screen and then just do the same on that. So that should be about 49 maybe. And then go back into the main comp. We're just going to go to the next point of contact for this, which is about there. Go back into screen, do an animation again to where this fills out, let's say about 80%, maybe 81.5. I know you can see that it does that. Go back into the main, go to the end bit where it finishes off, and then just bring the animation all the way to the end. And now you will have this. So this will now be animating while I'm using the Sonic. Go back into the screen, and then just after that animation finishes here, we're going to need to do some animation for our 3 layers that are below. So just go to that little end bit, and then turn on our 3 bottom layers. We're going to select all of these. Select the top one, hold down Shift, select the bottom one, and then press T to see the opacity of these layers. Then click the stopwatch, so that will animate all of these. And we'll just set these to 0%. We're going to go a few frames along and then bring these back up to 42%. And now, as soon as this finishes animating, this bit sort of fades in. And while that's concurrently going on, I don't want to be able to see this in the center. So what we can do is just go back to Black Solid 3, go to Circle 2, set the opacity of Circle 2 to 0. So that we just get that bit. And then in here, you can see that now animates. And then at the point where we start to put our Sonic up to it and then activate it, we're now going to animate the center point. So that's kind of here. And then we're going to go back into screen, black solid 3, click the stopwatch on the opacity of circle 2, and we're also going to click stopwatch on the radius. We're going to move a few frames along, and then we're just going to bring up the opacity to 100% so we can see it. I might move a few frames even further along and then animate the radius all the way until it's filled and it's finished animating on the screen. So now this animation should just look sort of like this. So you'll see the opacity comes in. Maybe I can change that opacity a little bit because I feel like it's maybe a little bit too... It needs to be a little bit shorter. So go into Effect, Cycle 2. Just move the keyframe of the opacity a little bit. So then it comes in a little bit quicker and that animates back out. So then when we activate this here, you can see now that there will be a circle that will run over it. And obviously right now I do think I kind of don't like the feathering on this layer. So I'm actually going to change the feathering a little bit to sort of be a little bit thicker on circle 2 and circle 1. Because I kind of want a bit of a wider effect on there. So just going to do that. And I think I prefer that much more over whatever we previously kind of had. That kind of adds a bit more to it. And I think that right there is looking quite good as far as the feathering goes onto these circles. Go back into our main comp, and now you can see that this is animating and looks a lot cleaner. So that's basically the same thing kind of David Tennant did in his. And that's pretty much it for this effect. You can kind of play about with it, play about with like the perspective. Obviously, it would be better if you do a 3D camera track on this effect if you're trying to get into more of a 3D scene. One that's at least got a much easier way to track the scene than my eyes. Obviously, you can see there's not much for me to track with. And it will obviously be much better if you're doing it sort of face forward rather than on a side like I am. Because you don't really see much of the screen if you are doing it on a side. But yeah, that's how you create the sort of Doctor Who 14th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver effect. I hope you all have fun with this one. And I hope you all have a good rest of your day. I'm out. Peace.